Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the City Council successor agency to the Redevelopment Agency and Housing Authority regular meeting. Would you please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do we have any changes to the order of the agenda?
Nothing from staff this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. I just want to give fair warning to my fellow council members that we have two presentations tonight. I'd like to hold off on the second one because it's a proclamation recognizing the Chicken's Ball. And as you may know, the Chicken's Ball is now in rehearsals for the show that comes up, I believe, next month. And they have 5 or 6 representatives that are coming tonight, but they won't be here till about 8 or 8:15. So I promised them that I would wait until they got here and we'll make the presentation. I'll find a convenient time during our proceedings and we will pause and present the proclamation. Okay. All right, let's, I think the next thing we do have a presentation from the gun buyback program, and is that Danielle and? Okay, welcome.
Yeah.
At the clicker? Good. Okay.
At the clicker.
Yeah, that's good.
Great. Well, good evening, Mayor Ron Collins and Vice Mayor Laura Palmer Lohan, and council members Mark Olbert, Sarah McDowell, and the council member Adam Rack. Thank you so much for having us. We're citizens for a San Mateo County gun buyback. And this is Dr. Brad Silver, who is the co-chair of our committee. And in the audience is Sheila Nathan Brer, who is also a San Carlos resident, is probably going to be there later, not able to come tonight because she has young children. But with us tonight are Al Kamoli and Joanne Kamoli, who joined us just for the December 2019 buyback. So we're happy to be here tonight. We had 3 gun buybacks, 2 in 2018 and 1 in December 2019. That was our last one. Thank you to the council members who came to that one. Laura and Sarah, I think, came to the last one, and other buybacks. You've supported us by coming and checking out what we do. And also here tonight is Chief Mark Dury, who has been our collaborator with the sheriff's office. Oh, there you are. Okay, there you are. He was back there.
Yeah.
And his team has been wonderful to work with. We've been really, really lucky in terms of having this whole program pulled together. So we met with the sheriff, our committee, back in February 2018, and we really wanted to put on one gun buyback, given that there hadn't been a large-scale San Mateo County gun buyback since 2013, and the sheriff was immediately agreed to do that with us, to implement it, advertise it, put it on, staff it, but he said, you need to raise $75,000 so that we had enough funds to give out for the firearms, because they can't do that. So we said, okay, and we got this nice letter from the sheriff, and we took off running, and we went to San Mateo County cities. We actually attended, I think, 11 city council meetings all over the county and asked to present to them and answer questions about our mission and wanting to put on a gun buyback. And we really focused on suicide by firearm. As you may know, suicide by firearm is much more prevalent than homicide by firearm nationally. In San Mateo County, in the last 3 years, there's been 70 suicides by firearm as opposed to 20 homicides by firearm. So that's really been our focus. And we, to our great surprise, and thanks mostly to San Carlos for getting us going, we raised $140,000. So we owe quite a bit to you, because you, in 2018, took a leap of faith with our group, and you had committed to giving us $50,000 worth of matching funds, which was instrumental in making the success of our program from there on out when we went to other cities. It gave a lot of momentum. So these are the cities that contributed. And also want to just notice Congresswoman Jackie Spear and Congresswoman Anna Eshoo and Assembly Member Kevin Mullen also have supported us financially. The purpose of the gun buyback is to provide a community service to rid your homes of unwanted or unsecured firearms. We also distribute free gun locks like this. We have given out hundreds now in the 3 gun buybacks that we've had. We also provide literature about gun safety and suicide prevention to the attendees there. So our group goes ahead and talks to people while they're in their cars and gives them these information. We have received 518 anonymous and voluntary surveys back that were completed in the 3 buybacks that have given us a lot of information about who comes to our events and what we can do for improving. And we've increased the number of gun-free homes in the county. We try to make it a fun event. We've had a radio station, KBLX, who's been promoting our last 2 events, and they've come to the last 2 events as well, which brings out some folks and makes it kind of more of an event, a health event. We also have a raffle. This past one, we gave out 2 gift certificates to 2 restaurants, the Avenir Group, that has Town and Milagros and NOLA. They gave us a gift certificate to raffle off, and we also got one from the Half Moon Bay Brewing Company, which people loved to have that option. So this is where we want to be really transparent about what we've done. If you look at the very last column, the total number of firearms that have been surrendered is 1,254. And of those, 515 were the handguns, and 686 were rifles or shotguns, and 53 were assault weapons. So we were there. It was pretty much consistent throughout. The last buyback we had a little bit less leeway to advertise it because we had a little issue with the venue and we had to change locations. But pretty consistent in terms of the numbers. We have given out, in terms of the $140,000 that we had raised, we have given out $125,700, and we have remaining $14,300, which is not enough for another buyback at this time. So we are here to humbly ask for support and some financial support from San Carlos. We chose to come here first because you have been our greatest supporters. And we have a lofty goal of raising about $165,700 so that we could do 4 buybacks, given that we want to have about $45,000 for each one. And now Brad's going to do a couple more.
Sure. Thank you. So on the next slide, which is here, I hope, you'll see some of our law enforcement people with some of the weapons. These are some of the assault weapons, May 2018, December 2018, and December 2019. Chief probably could talk about these weapons more, but they look pretty menacing to me. These are things that we collected, that they collected at the scene. So this is just some data on how these people who fill out these surveys, how they obtain their firearm. And as they happen, they actually inherited them. They didn't purchase them. Some bought them, but half inherited them. And on the top right, you can see that most of them do not plan to get another gun. The bottom left, 54% did have formal training, but I must say that in a lot of those cases, it was military training, and you'll see later the average age of the people. So probably the training might have been 20 or 30 years ago, but at least people have had some training, half of them. And then on the bottom right, you see most people did not have a child or a youngster in the home. Men dominated, 74% are men. One about respondent age I think is very interesting. You might think this is an event for young people. It really clearly is not. This is mostly an event for older people. The biggest group was the 55 to 64 group, and then even older than that. So this is an older population, has inherited these weapons and doesn't really want them anymore. The other one, you can see it's about 60% Caucasian, 11% Black, 10% Asian, and 6% Hispanic, which we think we would like to try to expand in this area. Is your home now gun-free? 62% say yes, 38% still have weapons at home, and that's why these cable locks are so important because people, many times we pass them out, their guns are not locked up. And so when we give them this lock, we feel better that the one that they do have at home may be locked up. And most people do not plan to get another gun after this. They're pretty much done with this. Now, in terms of why people turn in their weapons, I'll just read some of these. A family member is depressed and expressing he wants to die. I lost a 17-year-old stepson to gun violence. There's domestic violence in the family. We found 2 guns in the attic. The guns belong to someone who has mental illness. We brought in the guns to avoid suicide. Another woman, daughter killed with the same type of weapon. Getting old, do not want my wife to deal with it. And a few people did mention suicide. So that was really a very important thing, we think, is why people turn these weapons in. So this is this is the breakdown of counties. So San Mateo County obviously led it, but since this is a city, an area-wide thing, it had to be. Most people are from San Mateo. We did have some of the people. In terms of cities, Redwood City being a large city was number 1, then good old San Carlos right there in number 2, and then you can see down from there. When this is broken down, though, to participation per 100,000 residents, San Carlos clearly dominated, and so that was our number 1 city, and we can talk about why we think that is.
So I think San Carlos is probably pretty aware that their postcards are very effective. In the first time that we had the buyback, there was 18.5% of the participants were from San Carlos, which is remarkable given the size of this county. And the San Carlos residents participated 8 times more than other residents in San Mateo County. And 82% of the San Carlos residents who participated in the first buyback through the postcard now lived in gun-free homes versus 54% of the overall May participants in 2018. So the numbers clearly show that the postcards are effective. This is the postcard that I received. So you've done it for all 3 buybacks. I looked at the next 2 buybacks, and it's still remarkable how many people come out for San Carlos because we think it's because of the postcard, frankly. For the last 2 buybacks, you've had about the same participation in this city as you do in San Mateo, which is a city with about 3.5 times the number of residents. So just wanted to give a shout out to that. About 73% of the people thought it was somewhat easy or very easy. 52% thought it was very easy to participate in the gun buyback. We got lots of comments in our survey. Great job, well done, awesome, very polite officers. Thank you for the service, great program, keep it up. Many comments about how well organized it was and requesting more frequent buybacks. One thing we try to work on is the wait time. In the first few hours, it's pretty busy. There's a line of cars. So just facilitating people coming through quickly, and we're working on that as a program. So we want to, again, thank you. There's no way we could have done what we've done and put on these successful buybacks and having received 1,254 firearms over the last 3 buybacks without you and your support, your financial support from the very beginning. And we very much appreciate all that you've done. And would really love some support. We do not have enough money for another buyback. We are really, at this point, kicking off a second fundraising campaign, starting here, but going to our other very, very loyal supporters. We've had a lot of great feedback about the program. So thank you so much for participating and contributing to us, and we're open for any questions you have.
Thank you, Danielle and Brad. Mark, you had a question or 2?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Danielle and Brad. Nice presentation. Thank you to your colleagues as well, for doing this. First off, actually, just a comment. We are moving into our own budget season, and I personally certainly would support providing, continued funding, additional funding to your program. I think it's a very noble and very practical solution, or not solution, but attempt to help solve a serious problem. And in that regard, I'd also encourage you to, I don't know what state they're in at this point, but you might want to also, if you have not planned on doing it already, to contact the San Carlos Community Foundation, or whatever their current name is. I don't think they go by that, but that'd be another group of people to talk to. And lastly, just a thought, since your sense is that the postcards that the city of San Carlos sent out had such a big effect, and I'd certainly support us doing that again as well. I wonder if maybe you ought to ask, when you are asking people for cities for donations, to also have them make a parallel commitment to send out postcards, because you have some great data saying it works. Okay, you get more bang for your buck, if you'll pardon the pun. So, but great job.
We've got more. Adam.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much for the presentation, for the success, and Chief, for your work as well. Had a couple, just 2 or 3 questions. One just I'll start with the easy clarification one. So Danielle, just so you're saying, so you're hoping to do a 4th one to kind of get some more funding to supplement that, and then you're doing a separate round of fundraising, or ultimately to keep this going on afterwards, or is your goal to just get a 4th one?
Sorry, our goal is to do 4 more.
4 more, got it.
So in order to do
Make
that,
sure it was a 4th
yes.
one or 4 more? Okay.
4 more, sorry
Got it.
about that.
Okay, thank you. And can you tell me, 2 questions. One, have you thought about also, I know San Carlos is high and we've done the postcards and everything else, but I think most of the locations have been in this area as well. Have you thought about doing the buybacks in the North County or on the coast or other areas as well to kind of maybe might be easier for people than, and encourage them to do it?
We are doing all our good evening, everyone. We are due all our gun buybacks in the sheriff's office jurisdiction. And our issue is we contacted the city of certain sections in Belmont and different areas, and no one wants to host a gun buyback.
Okay.
So we lost our previous venue that we had because of some construction, and the venue that we had on Skyway was probably our best gun buyback. We're getting better every time. My team that we get better every time. I know Vice Mayor Lohan and Council Member McDowell came out to take a look at our program. It gets better every time, and the place we have on Skyway really works out well for us. So I know Daly City PD does a gun buyback in the North County. I think they got like 50 guns. They just don't have the success that we do. We just have a good program. We have a good advertising base. But not a lot of people want to have gun buybacks hosted in their area because they don't want people to bring firearms in their area. So.
Makes sense. Appreciate it. And that just sort of leads me to the second question, or my last question, I should say. So you've gotten support from a number of the communities in the county. So what has the response been from, have you gone to all 20 cities in the county? And I mean, it sounds like Daly City does their own thing, but what was the response from some of the other places who haven't wanted to contribute?
Well, we've had remarkable success, obviously, partly due to your contributions, but so we've had very few cities who had refused. Some refused to agendize us and have us come to their meetings, and those I think we're going to just show up at meetings and kind of talk in public comment to try to get on the agenda. So there were 2 cities who refused us. One of them brought up their chief and who said, how many murders have we had here? And the chief said none, and wasn't kind of looking at the whole picture, although we're talking about suicidality. So it was that kind of response of just a very anomaly that when they refused us, frankly, it happened in 2 cities. Most were very supportive and willing to contribute. We asked for a very modest contribution the first go around. I think we're going to go a little bit more, given that we've had successful buybacks and people trust us and we have a reputation now. We'll probably ask for a little bit more going forward.
Great. Thank you.
Sarah.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to briefly comment that having attended the recent buyback, I was just so impressed by how organized it was and incredibly safe and well attended, and it was just so dialed in. It was just quite the process to watch, so thank you for having me out there. And I wanted to also say that I know this isn't your day job. You guys have families and jobs, and you really came at this with such good intentions and really threw a lot of your time and effort and hard work into it. And I just want you to know how much we appreciate it because it really makes a big difference in our community. So thank you very much.
I'm not sure we really spent much time on this slide, but you can look at the weapons that we collected through some of the buybacks, and I'm very happy myself they're off the street. Pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's been so amazing as a citizen to go to your sheriff and within like a couple hours develop a program and a mission and have a game plan and actually succeed, and with so much community behind us and kind of galvanizing the whole county in some ways. It's been a great experience, and working with the sheriff's office and Chief Dury has been great. It's really citizenship in the making. It's been an experience of a lifetime.
Been great.
Laura?
Great. Thank you, Mayor Collins. And thank you for the work that you're doing to keep our community safe. I really appreciate it. I echo the comment made earlier by one of my colleagues, Councilmember Olbert, about wanting to continue to support this program. And I guess maybe my question is for you, Jeff. Is there an action item where we would put this on a future agenda, or would it become part of the budgeting process? What would be your suggestions there?
I would be happy to put this on a future agenda, assuming that we're talking about something in scale with what we did last time. There would be ample funding in the current budget year to make such a contribution to the program if the council would like. So if there's a majority of the council who would like to see this item brought back, I'd be happy to agendize it sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I mean, if it's in the same ballpark as what we did before, and maybe add a few dollars, since we know the postcards work and those are relatively inexpensive, we could reach a larger audience. I'd be in favor of that.
I'll go out on a limb and say it's unanimous. Thank you. Wonderful presentation. I just had a couple questions, and my screen went dark, so I think I remember what they were. But is there anything that you learned that from the first three that you would apply to future buybacks?
Well, like we did say, that there are some demographics that we were not hitting. For instance, the youth, the Latino population here, and there's reasons for that, probably longer than this presentation, but to really outreach to people so that they feel welcome. The sheriff's job does an amazing job publicizing it, and so that doesn't seem to be an issue. We have tried to convince a couple other cities and mentioned the postcard and that effect, and that's been a little bit difficult to sell. I know it is a commitment financially, but it really shows that it brings out your residents.
And this mailer went to San Carlos residents, huh?
Only San Carlos, right?
Okay. I wonder what would happen if it was mailed out to the whole county.
Right.
Just thinking out loud. So,
Yeah.
a question for the chief: if I brought my gun and I went home and a member of my family said, "What did you just do? That was a family heirloom. Go back and buy it back." And if I showed up at the end of the day and said, "You know that gun I sold you 3 hours ago? I think I want to buy it back." What would you say to me?
There's no buyer's remorse. We would not let you have the gun back. Once you turn it in, it's our weapon.
Okay.
And that's it. And it will be recycled, as they all are.
All right. Well, thank you all. Great presentation. We'll have this on a future agenda, and we'll see where that goes.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Okay, we are now on to public comment. Persons wishing to address the City Council on matters that are not on the posted agenda may do so at this time. Each speaker is limited to 2 minutes. If an item you are speaking on is not listed on the agenda, please be advised that the council may briefly respond to statements made or questions posed as allowed under the Brown Act. The City Council's general policy is to refer items to staff for attention or have the matter placed on a future City Council agenda for a more comprehensive action or report and formal public discussion and input at that time. So I do have one speaker card for an item not on the agenda, and that would be Jane Cummings. Welcome, Jane.
I bring the issue of pedestrian safety in the city to the council this evening, February 24th, 2020. On January 24th at dusk, I was one of 2 pedestrians involved in a pedestrian versus auto incident. Both Jean and I were about 3/4 of the way across the walkway on a walk signal. We had the right of way. This fact was documented with witness testimony to the responding deputy. I fell to the ground for no apparent reason. I hit my head and wrenched my back and knee. Thud. Ouch. The event was recorded by Deputy Nugent, star 25839, case number 200085. I give my express permission for a copy of this report to be provided to council for review. The driver was cited for failure to yield to the pedestrian. 911 was called and we were transported to the Stanford Hospital Level 1 trauma unit. I am not dead. A lot went right for me and I am grateful. I still hear the thud of Jean's flesh and bones hitting the pavement. Jean did not move. She made no audible sounds. I thought she was dead. I've experienced nightmares awakening in a panic. My sleep is minimal, and my body aches and still has swelling. Sorry, it is difficult to find a comfortable position. I will need surgery for damage to my shoulder. The knee is questionable surgery at this time. Excuse me. I'm working on rehab and chant Namyo Renge Kyo that it will be resolved fairly and with justice for all involved. I hold no ill will to the driver, but admittedly do for the governance that I feel has not taken pedestrian safety seriously in the unparalleled growth, with more yet to come. To add insult to injury, I was walking, it's unbelievable. I was walking south on San Carlos Avenue to the Caltrain station and was almost struck by a Tulsa electric vehicle. I could not hear it coming. The sound was too soft. Again, this time I was just brushed. My hair was black, like Mr. Rusk over here, before the incident, and I now have salt and pepper. That's how frightening it was. Now, that's a joke, and I think we can all have fun with this sometimes, and I hope that we can bring a little levity to the room. But the fact is that we've had unparalleled growth in the county and in San Carlos itself. And I just don't think that the pedestrian ways are safe. I could not hear it coming. The sound was too soft. Again, I don't mean to make light of this second incident in less than a week. I have fire in my belly that the Wheeler exit at 1245 San Carlos due south has mirrored exit walls so drivers can see pedestrians on the sidewalk, and an audible exit so pedestrian has a chance to register cognitively that the vehicle is approaching. The traffic signal at San Carlos due east-west and Laurel due north needs to be designated left signal only. Thank you for your thoughtful consideration of this request.
Thank you, Jane. Okay, is there anyone else who'd like to speak on any item not on tonight's agenda? Okay, we'll move on now to council communications. These are announcements that are just brief items from my fellow council members on their any upcoming events or correspondence that they've received, or on any regional boards or commissions on which they sit. So with that, Mark?
Oh, I thought I was slow off the mark. But that's okay. I'm ready.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had two things tonight. The first is several weeks back, and this was shortly after the news hit about the threats that were made against the people who attend the Holy Trinity Lutheran Church. I had the opportunity to attend a Sunday service there. It happened to be, I think, a day or so after they had arrested the person who they charged with the crime. And I just want to publicly thank, I've done this privately, but I just want to publicly thank Chief Dury and his detectives and all of his uniformed staff for what a great job they did there. And I know that the people who were part of that church were very appreciative of all the work that was done. And I understand from what the pastor told us that Sunday morning that they in part reciprocated by giving you back a now Christian bomb-sniffing dog. So anybody interested in that story can talk to the chief about that. It's a good story. The other thing that I wanted to mention is I think by this point we have all been approached by, I believe it was Don Eaton, a community member, about a idea he had for some public artwork that he'd like the council to consider funding. And when I spoke to him, one of my takeaways was, actually, there had been some discussion some years ago about potentially having a partially publicly funded art program for San Carlos to kind of enhance the environment of the community. And not speaking directly for and against his particular idea, I'd like to ask my colleagues if this isn't something that, since we're coming up on the budget season, whether or not we might want to ask the Parks and Rec and Culture Commission to look into the issue of whether we ought to have some kind of partially publicly funded art program to encourage community involvement. And it's kind of a neat way to bring a community together. And I've done a little research on it, and I understand quite a few communities have done things like this. So I bring that up as an idea that to see whether or not there's interest in asking Parks and Rec and Culture to look into this.
Greg, is this something that we need to ask to be put on agenda setting?
Well, I don't think Councilmember Olbert's asking that you consider it at this time, but that you just have to develop a consensus to ask that the Park and Rec Commission consider it. So I think you could just by consensus do that tonight if that's the council's preference.
May I, because I appreciate you clarifying that and asking that question. I should have remembered. Really, council action, if any, in the future would come, in my opinion, after we've had our local experts study the topic. It's really a question of, do we want them to study this? And perhaps, come back to us with a recommendation, which might be, don't do it, but, whatever. So that's really what I was bringing up.
Okay. Well, I will defer to my other council members to see what the interest level is.
Can I just ask one clarifying question on this, Greg? So just sort of for future reference so I understand. So if a council member wants to bring up an item for one of the commissions to look at, I just want to make sure we're doing it in the appropriate place. I'm not opposed to what Mark's recommending. I just want to understand.
Well, it could be brought up under under this item, council member comment, or I think you might have an item at the end of the meeting, reports to council. I think it could be under either one of those.
Great. No, I just want to make sure so for future I have it clear. Thanks. And I'm certainly happy from my end to.
Excuse me, additional comments and communications is what I meant. Sorry.
I would welcome that. I've put a resident in touch with Amy about, I think there is some general wanting of more art, and there's a lot of interest in the community, so I would support that.
Well, I think there's enough direction there. Okay. All right, Laura.
Thank you, Mayor Collins. I just wanted to thank staff for putting together the Homes for All supported Welcome Home San Carlos event that was held on the 1st of February. There was about 80 people from the community there, and we had a very good discussion. This time there was a blending of the discussion around affordable housing as well as transportation and how the two are interrelated. So we got some good feedback from the community on that, and I know those events are not easy or simple to put together, so I just wanted to acknowledge that effort. And then Commute.org held its board meeting last week. I attended as the alternate. Sarah McDowell is the representative for San Carlos. And it was a fortunate meeting to attend. I learned that US 101, just south of 280 in San Francisco, is going to be undergoing a deck replacement in July, and there will be portions of that road that are closed from July 7th through the 28th, and the community is encouraged to plan ahead, use alternate modes of transportation and other routes, and I'm hopeful that we can do some work here in our community to inform our community members about that change, and I know Nicole Scott was in that board meeting as well as an attendant, so attending that as well. And then lastly, I'm going to backtrack a little bit and just go back to, if I could ask staff to follow up with Jane Cummings with respect to her comments and express concerns on her experiences recently as a pedestrian.
Okay, thank you. Sarah?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to report out on two meetings. One is something that Mayor Collins and I attended, which was the Council of Cities dinner. And there was a really great presentation about the upcoming census. And I just wanted to let the community know that that's coming up in March. It happens only once every 10 years. And the census can be filled out online, which is new this time, by mail or over the phone. It's really important that everyone is counted in our community. Federal funding depends on it. So this is the first of many reminders that I will be making to please make sure that that is filled out. I also attended the library governing board meeting, and I wanted to let residents know that curbside pickup is coming soon to the San Carlos Library. We're one of only 2 cities that will be piloting this program, where patrons can wait in their car if you have a sleeping baby in the back or don't want to get in. You can't find parking in the parking lot, you can roll on up and staff will deliver your holds to your vehicle, which is going to be an exciting thing to try out here. And also the library will serve as a question and answer center for the census, where patrons can come ask questions and use the internet to fill out your survey. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Adam.
Thank you, Mayor. I also attended the City and County Association of Governments meeting, and we received the presentation on the express lanes and the toll lanes coming in. There's going to be fairly soon some impacts to the freeway and the side roads based on some of the exits being changed, and we're going to be adding a lane from Whipple North. And so I just want to see if maybe from the staff perspective, we might be able to send something out. There's going to be some notification out on the freeways and stuff, but since our postcards are so successful as some of this comes up, because there will be, I think, 6 times where the entire freeway will be closed as they're putting up some of the signs over the freeway. So it'll be a pretty big impact over time on some of the exit ramps, and that's coming over the next couple months to couple years.
All right. And I just have one item. At a recent Caltrain board meeting, the concept of Caltrain having a transit-oriented development policy was discussed extensively. Caltrain doesn't really have a lot of land that's available for affordable housing, but we now have a policy to make sure that any development that can be constructed with either mixed use or any kind of housing project is going to have a transit-oriented and affordable housing component to it. So there's some progress along those lines. All right. Why don't we move on to item 7, consent calendar. Anybody want to pull any items? If not, I will entertain a motion.
I move to approve City Council consent calendar items A through I.
Second.
All right, a motion and a second. Any discussion? Crystal?
Councilmember McDowell?
Yes.
Councilmember Olbert?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Palmer Lohan?
Yes.
Councilmember Rack?
Yes.
And Mayor Collins?
Yes. All right, item 8, agenda setting. 8A is consideration of discussing and amending the policy / protocol for canceling city council meetings and general discussion of proposal. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, this is something that I had given to staff because I'd like us to consider, and it is triggered by the cancellation we did of our first I believe it was our first meeting in February. In a nutshell, I'd like to see us only cancel council meetings if the council itself, unless it's an extraordinary circumstance, unless the council itself decides by voting on it that we want to cancel it. That's in fact what we do traditionally with our summer meetings and with our December meetings. And my motivation for asking this is, as we have all remarked on multiple occasions, we have a lot of things on our docket. Even in situations where we don't want to exclude somebody because perhaps they can't attend a particular meeting, and that's why we were thinking of canceling it. We don't want to exclude somebody from decisions. Our discussion time, our ability to talk to each other about public topics is very, very precious. By law, the only time we can actually do it is at a meeting. So I'd like to sort of set a higher standard or higher threshold, if you will, for canceling meetings, and basically this agenda item would be to have staff bring back the language that would be needed to do that, to amend our ordinances and protocols.
Greg, since this is agenda setting, I take it any questions we have are very limited at this point?
We want to keep the discussion very general, but in anticipation of this, I added a provision for general discussion of the proposal, anticipating that the council might want to ask some questions about it, but not too deep in any specific proposals, but about why Councilmember Olbert would like this to move forward, or any ideas he might have had. I think he could kind of generally put those out there. That's why I set up the agenda item that way.
I don't see any lights on for anybody else who wants to speak. Is there any other comments? Is there any interest for putting this on an agenda? Well, I'm not seeing it. So, okay, we are moving on to 8B. This is consideration of agendizing an item to pay down the CalPERS unfunded liability. I asked that this be put on. We have a pretty big surplus this time, and I think this is something we really ought to talk about, because we have, as all cities have, a pretty high level of pension costs in the city, and every time that we are in a position to make a payment, that's something that we have entertained in the past, we've done in the past, and I'd like to see us talk about it again. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Having been on the council when we last looked at doing this, and in fact approved an expenditure, I was opposed to that. I suspect I will probably be opposed to this again. But rather than, I don't want to go into the reasons for that now, because we're merely talking about whether we should put it on the agenda. I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing to put on the agenda. I would ask, however, that kind of along the lines of some other things we've talked about recently, particularly because we're coming up on our formal once every 2 years budget cycle, I would strongly recommend that this item or this topic be included in the budgetary discussion, because it is essentially a question of resource allocation, financial allocation of money. And for that matter, it also is related to sort of the general sort of compensation structure that we want to have for the city, because obviously as we spend more public money to reduce whatever risk there may or may not be with pension obligations, that benefits potentially future taxpayers in the future, but it also benefits staff, and that's therefore part of compensation. And so for all those reasons, I think it's a good thing to talk about, but we should talk about it as part of the budget process.
Laura?
Thank you, Mayor Collins. I would be in favor of bringing this forward as a separate agenda item. The reason being is that fiscal management and oversight is one of our primary responsibilities. And we are an elected body, and we are here primarily because of that. So I would be in favor of bringing that forward.
Okay. I don't see any lights at this end of the dais. So we have two people that would like to see it on an agenda. Is there another one?
Sure, I'd like to see it on the agenda. Absolutely.
All right. I guess that's going on a future agenda.
Can I ask where we stand on the issue I raised and talked about somewhat extensively about whether it would be part of the budgetary discussions or done as a separate item?
I propose that we bring it forward prior to the general budgeting.
And is that the basis of it? Okay, in that case, I withdraw my support for it, because I really do feel it should be part of the budget discussion.
Adam, did you have a
No,
thought on
I'm
that?
in favor of bringing it as a separate item. I think we talked about it previously at a different meeting, and I'd like to bring it up separately.
Okay. All right. Moving on. Reports to council. This is a presentation on the results of the 2020 Community Satisfaction Survey, and it looks like Tara is going to regale us with facts and figures.
Oh, I'm going to do an introduction.
Oh, you're just going to do an introduction.
Why is this? Are we going this way tonight? it's not turning. Okay, well, we're at an angle this evening. I wanted to take a moment to introduce to you are you the president, owner? What is your title? Yes. President, CEO, owner, chief strategist, everything for True North Research. This is Dr. Timothy McClarney, who conducted the survey for us last month, and he's going to present all the facts and figures that Ron so eloquently discussed. So here is your...
Here's my clicker.
This is your clicker, forward, backward. Pretty simple.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Tim McClarney with True North Research. We're a firm that specializes in working with public agencies and cities around the state for about 20 years, using surveys to develop statistically reliable understandings of the communities that they serve. We've helped with about 1,000 research studies for public agencies, and about a third of the work we do is similar to what we're going to be talking about tonight, which is a citizen satisfaction survey or community opinion survey. We have also had the privilege of working with San Carlos going back about a decade now. And so I mention that because as I go through tonight's presentation, you're going to see some results not only from the most recent study that we conducted, but also prior surveys going back to 2014. I also may make comment on how the results we're seeing here in San Carlos compare to what we might typically see for other cities doing this kind of work. I just wanted you to have a sense for the experience base from which I'd be speaking. I also welcome questions from council as I go or at the end, whichever is your preference. Before we talk about the results, helpful to take a quick moment to talk about the methodology of the study. Conducted in January of this year, we start out by going to a database of all residential units in the community. That way, every household has an equal probability of being selected. We use what's called a mixed method approach to conducting the study, meaning we're not just recruiting by telephone and doing data collection by telephone, which is the way it was done 8-10 years ago. We are now recruiting using mail, email, and phone. So 3 different recruiting methods, 2 different data collection methods that can participate by telephone or online at a password-protected website. This approach just gives us a higher participation rate, less response bias, overall greater reliability on the study. This year, I think we had set out originally to do 400, and we wound up with 744. And so consistent with what's happened in the past, we always kind of under-promise and over-deliver. We try and be a little conservative in the estimated participation rate. And what we find is your residents are happy to share their opinions with us once they understand that it's a survey about their community. Now, because this was a random sample of 744 and not a census of all your adult residents, it has what's known as a margin of error due to sampling. That's plus or minus 3.5%. What that means is we can be 95% confident that the results we'll talk about tonight are within 3.5% of what we would have found had we spoken with all of your residents. Okay, so on to the results. This first slide shows the results of what we call the quality of life question. We simply asked individuals how would they rate the overall quality of life in San Carlos. Would they say it's excellent, good, fair, poor, or very poor? On the far left there, you see the results for 2020. We had 93% of respondents this year tell us that they'd rate the quality of life as excellent or good. That hasn't changed a lot over time. In 2014, it was 98%, so about 5 points higher. What you have seen is a bit of a softening in the percent who say excellent, right? You're seeing overall combined excellent, good about the same, but more saying good today, less saying excellent. Although there's sort of a tendency to look at the trend, I can tell you, having done this with a lot of cities and over the last 20 years, in today's environment, if you've got better than 9 out of 10 of your residents saying the quality of life is excellent or good, that's a really good score. All right, so although you want to pay attention to the trend, you also want to kind of think that, hey, we still have better than 9 and 10 giving us an excellent or good rating. Now, after this slide, after that question, we asked individuals, if the city government could change one thing to make San Carlos a better place to live, what change would you like to see? This was asked in an open-ended manner, meaning we didn't present them with the list of items you see here. They got to tell us in their own words what change they'd like to see. We went back and reviewed those verbatim responses and grouped them into the categories you see here. Number one issue was limiting growth and development. You had about 27% who mentioned that. Reducing traffic congestion at about 17%. And addressing parking issues 13%, and then provide affordable housing about 9%. Over the last 3 years, the number 1, 2, and 3 issues have been what you see here: limiting growth and development, reducing traffic congestion, addressing parking issues. Affordable housing is new. to the list this year in terms of the top 5. Now, we followed that up with a question about overall, are they satisfied or dissatisfied with the city's efforts to provide municipal services? Now, because we're asking them to speak about the city's performance overall, we're not referencing a specific service area. This can be considered an overall satisfaction rating for the city. And what we found in 2020 is we had 83% of respondents say that they were satisfied with the city's performance in this respect overall. You had about 12% who were dissatisfied, 4% who were unsure. Here again, it sort of waffles over time. You get a little more very satisfied sometimes, a little less very satisfied sometimes. But what is interesting is going back to 2014, this has always ranged in a pretty tight pattern. It's between 83% and 88% satisfied overall. That last slide, we asked about the city's overall performance. In this slide, we break it down into 20 different specific service areas, and we ask the same basic question. Overall, are you satisfied or dissatisfied with the city's efforts to provide this service? We've sorted them here from high to low based on that combined percentage of folks who said they're either very or somewhat satisfied. Top of the list, you see providing library services, holding special community events, providing trash collection services, right? As you go down the list, most of those you can see there's a whole tier that's about 75% or better saying that they're satisfied. When you get to the bottom, you see a couple themes that popped up earlier in that other slide: reducing traffic congestion on city streets, provide affordable housing, providing more public parking downtown. Those are the 3 that have the highest percentage of folks who say they were dissatisfied. It is worth noting, though, that the providing more parking downtown, although it's sort of been this issue that comes up each time we do this, the satisfaction rating went up 15% on that from 2018. So I asked Tara, I was like, did you do something? And she's like, oh yeah, we've got a new parking facility downtown. So residents are seeing that. Now, in the survey, we asked individuals to comment on whether the amount of effort they see from the city in 2019 is putting into each one of those columns, how that compares to 2018. So on the far left there, you see that the amount of effort they perceive the city putting into increasing housing, 59% see that effort has increased in the last year. 16% see it's about the same. 8% think it's decreased. To the right, communicating with residents, 27% see that that's increased, 52% the same, 7% less on over. What you tend to see on the first 4 there, that they see the amount of effort, or the percentage that see the amount of effort from the city is increased is larger than the percentage who say that it's decreased. When it comes to repairing and maintaining city streets, it's pretty even, right, in terms of the balance of the red to green on that slide. And then making traffic improvements, that's the one area where residents think in the last year that they see less effort from the city than they did in 2018. Shifting gears, how safe do residents feel when they're in each one of the scenarios that you see there on the slide? So walking alone in neighborhood during the day, far left, 99% say that they feel safe in that scenario. Walking alone in commercial and retail areas during the day, also very high at 96%. As soon as it gets dark, right, sort of naturally people feel a little less safe, but you still have 87% saying they feel safe walking alone in their own neighborhood after dark. 78% walking alone in commercial and retail areas after dark. That's one area that has actually declined a little bit in the last cycle. It went down about 8 points in terms of the percentage who said they feel safe, is that commercial area and retail areas after dark. And then finally, the fire. Thinking about wildfires, you had about 75% of folks who said that they feel reasonably or very safe. Now, we take an opportunity in the survey not just to talk about specific services like streets and roads and sidewalks. We also want to profile how residents view city government. And we do that in a couple ways. The first slide here simply asks residents to what extent they agree or disagree with the statements you see at the bottom of that slide. So for example, on the far left, city manages its finances well. You had 80% of residents agree with that statement. I trust the city of San Carlos, 77% agree. City is responsive to residents' needs, 68% agree. And then the city listens to residents when making important decisions, 61%. When you compare this slide to where we were in the results this time to where we were 2 years ago, there are no significant changes. That's actually pretty impressive when you think about all the anti-government rhetoric that we're seeing in sort of our national level politics that has a way of seeping in sometimes to how people react to government in general. And what we're finding is despite all that, you're still right where you were 2 years ago. So about 43% of the residents that we spoke with had had contact with city staff in the year prior to taking the survey. And we asked them to comment on how professional and accessible and helpful staff were in those interactions. And you can see here that staff gets high marks across the board, particularly for being professional. We also asked individuals to comment on how satisfied they are with the city's efforts to communicate with them through newsletters, the internet, television, and other means. I can tell you that having done this for 20 years, the one area that has changed the most for cities and public agencies is this question, right, is communication. What we've seen over time is that even in high-performing cities, there's this tendency for this to go downhill. I think because we have a combination of higher expectations from people, right? We're all taught if you want to know something, just reach in your phone, in your pocket, grab your phone out, and you've got the answer. That wasn't always the case. And it's harder to reach people. There's so many different sources that people can turn to these days for information. And so against that really, I think, more challenging terrain and increasingly challenging terrain, what we're finding is that, you know, agencies are sort of having to swim upstream against this, right? They've had a hard time in general doing that. With that in mind, it's sort of striking that your overall satisfaction rating hasn't changed much since 2014. You have 82% who were satisfied in 2020. You had 85% who were satisfied in 2014. You do see that the intensity of satisfaction has gone down a little bit, but the overall level is staying the same. Now, we follow that up with a question where we ask them to tell us what information sources they use to find out about City of San Carlos news, events, and programs. Here again, they got to pick among this long list. And what is striking about this list, and so different than really any other city I work with, is if you look at the top 5 sources, actually look at the top 6 sources, 5 of those top 6 are city sources, meaning things that you do as a city. So the city newsletter, Good Living Community Newsletter, 64%, so they turn to that. You have Nextdoor, number 2. That also, by the way, is really unusual. I've never seen Nextdoor come in number 2. It's really high here compared to some other communities. But then we're back to city sources again. Postcards, letters, flyers, or brochures mailed to the home, city's website, email notification from the city, street banners, right? So I think part of the explanation for why your satisfaction ratings have sort of stayed pretty stable over time relative to what we're seeing in most public agencies is that they're actually, you're doing a good job putting your story in front of them through all of these sources. Now, that notwithstanding, we want to always stay on top of residents' preferences, and so we took the opportunity in the survey to ask them for each of the items that you see there on the left or the possible sources, you know, or ways that the city could communicate with them, how effective do they view them? Do they view them as very effective, somewhat effective, or not at all effective ways for the city to communicate with them? And you can see here that 2 of these really sort of jump to the top of the list: postcards, letters, and newsletters directly mailed to the home. So you got your direct mail, and then email or e-notify. Both of those had 86% saying it's at least a somewhat effective approach. Now, we saw earlier that growth and development was the #1 issue that popped up when we asked individuals what change the city could make to make San Carlos a better place to live. We've also seen over time that it's been the top #1 in the last 3 surveys. But what isn't as clear when you see about the #1 is what's their perception of how much of it's changed, right, in the last. We know that it's been a hot issue the last 3 cycles, but what this slide shows us, when we asked them to tell us how would they rate the pace of development in San Carlos has had in the past 3 years, been too fast, about right, or too slow, what you're seeing over time is this sense that it's too fast. It's growing, right? In 2016, you had 29% who said the pace of development's too fast. 2018, that was 50%. In 2020, it's 55%. So there's this, it's not just the #1 issue, there's also this sense that it's speeding up. Now, anticipating that that might be an issue this cycle, we also took the opportunity to ask them, okay, well, there's growth and development generally, but what about different types of uses and types of development? And so for each of the items you see there on the left side of that slide, we simply asked them to tell us is there currently too little of this in San Carlos, about the right amount, which is that medium blue, or too much, which is that dark blue off to the right. And what's interesting is, your residents do a good job distinguishing between different types of development. When you look at the top 3 there, those tend to be items where the percentage who say there's not enough of this is larger than the percentage who say it's too much, right? For most of these, the dominant answer is it's about right. But so entertainment uses, music and arts, retail stores, traditional family homes, they see it sort of leans in the direction of too little. When you get to mixed use, apartments and condominiums, it flips the other way, right? They see too much. And then you're back to hospital and medical, it sort of leans to the left again, but the dominant answer being about right. And then finally, hotels, restaurants, and commercial, you see that those are leaning again back to there's a little too much of that. So again, continuing with the land use themes, we took the opportunity in this survey to ask a couple questions of residents in this area. So on the far left, we asked them, should the city of San Carlos be working with private property owners to redevelop older, outdated commercial areas in the city? 72% said yes to that. We also asked if the city should reduce the maximum building height allowed on Laurel Street in downtown San Carlos from 4 stories to 3 stories. You had 56% support that. You also had 54% for the city taking an active role in creating additional affordable housing units. And then when you get to the last item, which is pretty evenly split about the changing zoning regulations to reduce the square footage required for new single-family homes and residential additions, right? Okay, last slide before I wrap it up. Actually, second to last slide before I wrap it up, sorry. Most cities are faced with, I heard you talking about the budget discussion you're going to have later on this year. Most cities are in that position where there's a long list of things you could spend money on, certainly far longer than your budget would allow. And so you have to set priorities, right? So we take an opportunity in the survey to understand how residents would prioritize among a variety of potential uses of future city funds. So for each of those items you see there on that slide, we simply ask them to tell us, should this be a high priority for the city? Should it be a medium priority? Should it be a low priority? Or should the city not spend any money on this item in the future? And please keep in mind that not everything can be a high priority, right? So you introduce a little sense of competition. And what you find is at the top of the list, preparing for wildfires. Wildfires was the number 1, followed by accelerating the improvement of local streets and making improvements to storm drains to reduce flooding. And then finally providing additional parking downtown. One thing is interesting is many of these items we also tested in 2018, and both making improvements to the storm drains to reduce flooding as well as providing additional parking downtown, those dropped a bit in terms of perceived high priorities from where you were. Part of that is, I think, obviously bringing on that parking structure, but we do see that those items have being viewed as a little less important than they were 2 years ago. Final slide before we get to the conclusions. We took an opportunity in the survey to understand how your residents would feel about a potential sales tax increase in the community. And the wording was to provide funding for general city services in the city of San Carlos, including the maintenance of streets, sidewalks, parks, and public infrastructure, public safety and traffic congestion management. Shall an ordinance establishing a half-cent sales tax be approved, providing approximately $5 million annually for city services until ended by voters, with independent audits and all money locally controlled. What I just read you is a legally compliant 75-word ballot statement, meaning you could take that and put it on the ballot and it would satisfy the attorneys and could be voted on by your voters. What we found when we asked that question was you had 59% of the folks we spoke with said they would support that measure. You have about 19% who said definitely no, 15% probably no, and the rest were unsure or prefer not to answer. In the state of California, for a general tax like this, you need 50%. So just cold turkey with that question, you were 9 points above the simple majority that is required for passage of a general tax in California. So it looks feasible. Okay, so final slide. Key conclusions, what does all this mean? I go into detail in the full report, so I'll be brief here. Obviously, one of the real goals of this study is to kind of step back and talk to your residents, understand how we're doing, right, as this community, how they feel about the community, how they feel about the city's performance overall. and the customer service that's provided to residents. And what we find here in this study is that, like in the past, you're doing a good job, right? You're doing a good job. Residents they value the quality of life in the community. They think the city's doing a good job in providing city services. And when they've reached out and contacted staff, they've been really happy with the services they've received from staff, all in all. So in terms of an overall report card, this is a really good, solid report card, right? And I can tell you from experience that these are, when you get a good report card, it's earned, right? It's not given, right? If you as a city were neglecting some aspect of the services you provide to the community or an issue, and you do a survey like this, it will come up right away in a survey, and it stands out. So when you have the kind of levels of satisfaction we saw here, it's a reflection of good leadership, and it's a reflection of staff doing their job well on a day-to-day basis. So that's good. In terms of trends, we did see a few things that stood out from the past. We've seen this sort of slow decline in perceived quality of life in the community, coupled with concerns about growth and development and traffic congestion, as well as affordability, right? That's something that sort of jumped onto the list here in the last 2 years. But we also saw that, in other areas it's gone up. For example, with parking downtown, that's an issue that, having done this survey for the city going back to 2012, I've seen it every year. And it was nice to see suddenly, a change in that, and that it's tied to some of the structure that you created. Now, like any customer satisfaction survey, it should not just be about how we doing today, but also kind of looking forward. Where can we improve, right? Where are there opportunities to better meet our residents' needs? And those list of items that you see there in the bullets below are kind of your best opportunities, right? I won't go into each one of these because at least the first 6, because we've talked about those, they are part of the slide, but those are the areas where, from your residents' perspective, they see the most opportunity for improvement. The last one there, increasing communication of law enforcement successes to the community. We did see in a couple of cases in the survey where satisfaction with reducing crime, for example, had gone down about 5%. We saw perceived safety in one area go down a little bit. And despite the fact that you as a city are safer even than you were 2 years ago, right? Your crime rates are down, your police are doing a great job. And so oftentimes that's really a communication exercise, right? Crime is one of those things that can, if you see it in a neighboring community or you hear a story, right, that highlights crime, you can suddenly get this sense like we're not as safe as we really are. And so one area you might want to work on is sort of communicating out to the public about the successes you have in this area. So with that, I end my presentation. I welcome questions for council if there are any.
All right, thank you very much. I think Mark has a question or two.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for a nice presentation, as always. Just a few questions going through it. Let's start on slide 10, which was opinion of city staff. One thing that I was interested in is there a reason why when this question is asked, perhaps in the future, we couldn't be somewhat more fine-grained? In other words, to me, when I looked at this, I was pleased with the overall results, but it seems like there's a fairly significant change between very and somewhat, as opposed to, and some of the other charts, there's like, I really feel this way, I mostly feel this way, and then it starts, the extra category allows a little bit more finer-grained view.
What I would probably suggest in the future, if we want to dig in here, would be to have an open end that if somebody's less than very satisfied, you can ask, is there anything in particular you would suggest for improvement? We might get more traction there, right? For example, accessibility, right? If they're like, I wasn't at all satisfied, or I was somewhat satisfied, you could ping about and ask them, what was it about accessibility that was the issue, or popped up, and we may have some ideas that would pop up from that kind of a question.
And that's just adding an additional category wouldn't work. Just seems easier.
What category were you thinking?
Something between very and somewhat.
The very and somewhat tends to match how people tend to like to answer questions about satisfaction. This gets into measurement and scale, right? And so if you put something in the middle, even though you're trying to put it in the middle, if it doesn't register to a respondent that, that's a meaningful interval, they trip up, right? They don't know.
Right. You are the expert in the area, and that was actually part of the question. I'll leave it with you as one way or another. I wouldn't mind getting a little more visibility into that, and perhaps the first way or the way you suggested might do that.
Okay.
On page 12, I had a couple of questions and sort of comments for staff. It really looks to me like we need to figure out some way to be as effective a user of Nextdoor as we can. And I know that's been a perennial challenge, but I hope that we will actually elevate the priority of figuring out what we can do there, because it's our second most likely way of people learning about what we're doing. And then the other question I had, just going way down the list there, San Carlos TV, Channel 27. I know we have a number of people who are watching us here tonight, but that's such a small percentage. I guess it doesn't cost us that much to get that service, correct?
That's correct, yeah. It's really relatively inexpensive.
Okay, then it doesn't warrant anything else. Page 18, the sales tax ballot test question. I was a little interested in the sort of provenance and history of this. How did it come to be on the survey?
Every year when we look at the questionnaire, we kind of look and say, what are we going to keep? This is with staff. What are we going to keep? And we want to keep it dynamic, right? So what are we going to change, right? We don't want it to be just the same survey every year. And this was one of, I think, 4 questions that was brought back and said, we'd like to ask this.
In discussions with staff?
Correct.
Okay. I'll just make the observation that my opinion, issues of tax policy and whatnot, that's, I think, fairly much in the council's purview. And I was very intrigued by the answer that you got from the question, but that's the kind of thing that I would prefer that the council have an opportunity to weigh in on what they think that, whether that kind of question ought to be included in the survey. Just because taxes have an interesting footprint that's significantly political. And the last question I had has to do with the discussion you were having about the perception of crime given the actual data. I believe your analysis is correct, but is it possible that the community members are reacting to something else that makes them feel unsafe, and it is showing up in their perceptions of crime, as opposed to, well, if they only actually looked at the numbers, they realized they should feel better?
Well, it's interesting because the first thing, when I saw that number, the first thing I thought of was, and we're seeing this in a lot of other cities, was homelessness, right? Because there's a kind of a linkage that happens in the minds of many people. If they see homeless, they feel less safe, et cetera. And yet, when you look at your open-ended question, when we asked about what's the one thing we could change, homelessness was mentioned by like less than 2% of people. It's like 1.3% of people, which is the lowest that I have seen in any city in probably the last 2 years, right? So I was like, okay, so it's not homelessness, right? At least it doesn't appear to be homelessness like it would be in a number of cities. I think, again, it's interesting. I did my dissertation on sort of the mass politics of crime, right? And one of the whole sections I did it on was looking at fear of crime and concerns about crime relative to actual patterns of crime statistics, and they don't line up at all, right? It's often your safest city where when you talk to the residents, they feel the most concerned about it, right? And so I think more than anything else, it is a communication exercise of helping residents realize what the true patterns are, right? And that the crime has actually gone down, because it's very easy to look at a story, right, or see some homeless and or see some pattern in a park that makes you suddenly think that we're not as safe as we once were.
Which paradoxically, particularly can be the case given the sheriff's office recent string of successes in a number of areas. Just writing about the successes can remind people that, well, they had to succeed on some crime that they were solving.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Okay, Adam.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the great presentation, Tim.
Thank you.
Couple just comments. One, I just want to echo what Councilmember Olbert said in terms of I'd love to see some more qualitative data if possible as well. I think that would help to inform some of the things where we've got sort of this range of information, whether it's on crime or housing or other things. I think it would be interesting to get not just the quantitative stuff. This is obviously great data, but it would be helpful. And then the second one, I just had one more short comment and then a longer question. And just for me on the public safety piece, and this is maybe nitpicking on this, but the walking alone on slide 8, commercial and retail areas after dark, to me, those are like two very separate areas in our community and maybe don't reflect sort of accurately. I see the retail as the downtown and commercial more in the industrial area, and I think you might get some very different data from that. So I'm wondering in the future if we could sort of potentially pull that out as two separate questions. I know you don't want to make the survey
Right. Yeah, we can.
It's long, but
we can. You know, it's funny. The origin of that question, it's one of those questions that the ICMA has asked, and they have this sort of generic one-size-fits-all, really doesn't fit anybody survey. But there are a couple of questions in there that have traditionally been pretty helpful. That wording is the wording that lines up with theirs, so you have the ability to look and say, how are we doing relative to other cities? But I see your point, right, where people might think of those as mixing apples and oranges a little bit.
And then the bigger question, I said, can you just tell me a little bit more about, to me, I see sort of people all over the place on the housing issue and affordable housing, maybe much more favor for affordable housing, but then there's sort of this, we're doing too much of the apartments and condos, and can you try to dissect that a little bit? I'm trying to help me understand kind of what the true answer is on this.
So what you sort of have here are, it's like a Venn diagram, right? Two overlapping circles. You have a group of people who are concerned about growth and development, right? And they don't want to see more of much of anything, right? And then you have a group of people who are concerned about affordable housing. They recognize the cost of living is expensive, and they have a genuine concern for that. And then you have people in the middle who actually hold both of those opinions, right? They're struggling with this. They realize that on the one hand, affordable housing is, we need it, but on the other hand, I really don't want to build more, right? And so maybe there's a way to magically make more of this without necessarily developing, right? For the most part, you know, when you look at these slides, you can explain, like this one, Change of San Carlos, you can explain it by saying those are two different groups of people, right? You have the people on the top, those aren't the same people that are asking for providing more affordable housing. By the nature of the question, you get one or the other, right? But later on, you do find that concerns about affordable housing are there. It's a difficult balancing act, right? And the problem, as you point out, is a lot of the times affordable housing, it doesn't take the form of single-family homes, right? That is going to be higher density units in order to be able to meet that threshold.
Thank you.
Okay, Laura.
Thank you, Mayor Collins. Thank you for the report. Really interesting. Before I move on to my comments, just to build on Adam's question around the housing and the confusion there, is the data set large enough to do a split between the people who were talking about not wanting more development as well as those who were in favor of affordable, to see if we can get to the bottom of that particular question?
Absolutely. In fact, we may have that in the cross-tabs already, but if we don't, we can create it for you.
Yeah, that would be helpful. So I just noted here that I think that, to your point, you mentioned this, that there's a lot of good news in this, that our community is, you know, very engaged, and I'm particularly pleased with the feedback that we received about staff. I personally feel incredibly lucky to serve on this council with the team that we have, because I know how incredibly hard that they work, and I was really pleased by that. The issue, for example, like around traffic congestion, I'm really trying to better understand that. So I don't know if it's a future question type thing where we do an open-ended, but when I'm out about walking around the day, or, you know, with the dog at the end of the day or on the weekends, I notice, and I'm also a consumer of home delivery, whether it's online retail, and my kids were trying to consolidate to one shipment, or sometimes food service or grocery delivery, that type of thing. And it was cited in a report that was presented to us, I think, about a year ago, Jeff, if I'm not mistaken, that's actually up. In addition, we have really low unemployment, so that means more people are out working, and this last week there was a school break, so everybody was excited when they got to work and half the time when I arrived. So I'm just wondering if there's any way for us to understand what the community's expectations are around reducing traffic congestion, and what are some of the instruments a council like ours could deploy to address that.
And there is more in the report than I show here. I mean, I'm just trying to be sensitive in terms of how much data and how much of your time I take up. But one of the changes we saw in the last cycle between 2018 and now interestingly, isn't perceived traffic increase on major streets and arterials. It was in residential areas. So it kind of gets to the point of home delivery and some other things that it's not just the main drag that we're seeing it on, we're seeing it in residential areas. That's actually the only significant change in the last 2 years. So there is more here to dig in. And then we also, again, that's another area where we have the ability to sort of look around within neighborhoods and get a sense for that as well.
Okay, Sarah.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much for your presentation and all of your hard work. I also want to thank the community. I had a friend text me that she spent 27 minutes on the phone with your staff, and I thanked her profusely. I think it's hard for people to carve out a half an hour of their time to answer all of these questions, and I just want to let all of the community members know, that whoever participated, that this is really valuable to inform the work that we and staff do going forward. Two things that jumped out to me were the fact that affordable housing finally made the list. So although the data is kind of unclear, it's the first time since 2014, maybe ever. I'm not sure if it has ever come
Hasn't been top 5.
to the top.
It hasn't been top 5 before.
So I think that that speaks volumes to at least we're starting the conversation in our community, right? And we're having that conversation about why it's important. And the other thing that jumped out at me was the point about rating traffic circulation in the city and the fact that so few people think that it's good or excellent. Only 25% think it's good or excellent around schools. And I find that really concerning because that's, our most vulnerable population are our kids walking and riding their bikes to school. So this goes to Stephen's bike and pedestrian master plan. I'm really glad that we're doing that so that we can hopefully see some improvements in those areas. But I do find that number very low and concerning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Tim, great presentation. I'm just amazed at how thorough these things are. I don't usually spend 2.5 hours on a Sunday night reading council materials, but this one I did read. It was fascinating. Just 2 questions. You mentioned there's been a slight decline in perception of quality of life. Do you find that in other cities that you study?
We have, in general, yes, I would say that this isn't unusual, that if you go back, say, 8-10 years and take a snapshot, and then you take a snapshot today, I think there's only been 1 or 2 cities where I've seen it go the other way, right? Most of the time it's been a little bit of a drop over time. And so it's not unusual. I think, again, one of the things that's, I've been doing this for 20 years, and so one of the patterns we've seen sort of long-term trend is right before the recession, all the issues that you've seen pop up here, growth, development, traffic, right, concerns about that, those were all at the top. Recession hits, they disappear completely. Why? Nobody's building, right? Everyone's concerned about the economy, jobs, sustainability comes in. And now what's happening is as all of that economy is recovered and we're starting to see projects come online that were probably approved way back when are just now coming back online, all of a sudden those issues are coming back. And I think that as the more of that happens, the more the quality of life and the more affordability issues pop up, the more quality of life goes down a little bit.
I think Mark brought this up. I'm fascinated by the fact that Nextdoor as a method of communication was in 4th place 4 years ago, 3rd place 2 years ago, and 2nd place this year.
Never seen that.
That just, I find that amazing. Now, people talked about traffic. That we all get that, but do people have specific ideas or suggestions about how we can improve traffic? I mean, other than saying, have shuttles and stop driving your car, which don't seem to be realistic.
It's a difficult problem to solve, right? And
Yes.
when we've asked questions, I've had entire studies that are just about traffic management, believe it or not, and you ask all of these detailed questions and you'll get some ideas about some improvement, but honestly, most people are seeing the congestion. They just want to get places faster, and they're kind of looking to you and other governments to say, how do we fix this, right? And it's a problem that doesn't have a lot of answers. Right.
The other thing, one of my takeaways on public safety was to me, it's sort of ironic that we have such great police services, public safety services, and the perception is that they're not as good as they really are statistically. But yet, 10 years ago, when we had real problems with public safety, we had our own police department. I suspect that the perception of public safety was greater than statistically it really was. So just
and that gets to the point of, it's communication, right? And that's the hardest part, because crime, for the most part, hopefully is something that you don't encounter every day, right? You're having to sort of envision what it is, right? And people's mindset on that can be easily influenced by what they hear.
Finally, worth noting, figure 22, you didn't talk about this, but when you asked about additional amenities desired, a community of parks, the number one thing people mentioned was a pool. It even outranked dog parks, so I'm grateful to see that. All right. Mark, did you have another question?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
And I think we should probably wrap it up since we're
It's funny. I thought the pool was really low. Did I misread that?
You need to turn it upside down.
Turn it upside down. Okay. All right. The conversation we were having with Ron struck kind of a thought in my mind. A number of the issues, maybe all of the ones that are really difficult to get a hand on, like traffic and whatnot and perceptions of it. I suspect that's because they are fundamentally issues of what I know I tend to think of as balance. There's competing factors that you have to strike a balance, and the answer is almost always that whatever balance you pick, people don't like. It's a question of what the alternatives are. So the question I had for you is whether, as part of this kind of survey or whether it would have to be a sort of special purpose survey, is there a way of getting some sense of how well the community understands some of those balances? Another one, for example, that is threaded through a lot of the stuff you shared with us tonight is development. I know I spent a lot of time trying to explain to people that for a city like San Carlos, development is part of the way we have to pay the bills. I mean, we literally would not have enough money from property taxes and sales taxes to do all the things that people expect us to do without some level of development. Is there a way to do that in a survey environment or a different kind of environment?
And I mean, it's probably difficult to weave it into this one because we're trying to cover so much ground, right?
Yeah.
But there is that off-cycle survey that we did last year where we got to dig into topics that we could, because we had the room, because we weren't trying to replicate what was here every 2 years, right? So it's possible that could be an opportunity where we could say, all right, we're gonna do a little more deeper dive, getting people to think about trade-offs, getting people to think about balancing. You just have to set it up, right? It's one of those things where you have to sort of build up to those types of questions by sharing information as you go. That way you don't just get the knee-jerk reaction. You get their initial opinion, but you also get, now that they've really thought about it more, where do they land?
Right. And it may not be worth, given what the value we might get out of it, might not be worth the effort of doing that. So I'm not urging anybody to do it, but that's something that perhaps you and staff can talk about for the off-cycle thing. Because if it worked even a little bit, it might help us with, well, what do we need to communicate? Because that, to me, is what would come out of something like that, is what are the current either understandings or misunderstandings in the community, which we could then target with our messaging.
Okay.
Great. Thank you again, Tim. I always look forward to these community surveys. It's kind of like holding up a mirror and seeing what our city thinks of us. And looks like we have some things to work on and improve. But overall, very impressive. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you. Normally, we would move on to 10A, and we will in a moment. But I want to go back to the presentation that we put on hold, and I have a proclamation to present, and let me come around and do that. Tonight we're going to recognize the San Carlos Chickens Ball, who are celebrating their 80 years of community service. I would like the following people to come on up: Mona Klein, Karen Althoff, Donica Stanley, Gina Wintermark, Julie Engberg. I was worried that I wouldn't recognize anybody when you came in. Why don't you come this way and you can face the audience. I just have to say, selfishly speaking, I was in the Chicken's Ball for many years. It is not true that I've been in every Chicken's Ball. It started a decade before I was born or so. I would also like to recognize Chester Moore, who is right here. Chet's been involved in the ball longer than I have, and that is true. But he's been the official or unofficial photographer for as long as I can remember. So it's nice to see Chet here, and he always takes great pictures. But I just want to read parts of this to you. We don't normally read proclamations, but I think it's important to read them. I could almost just say it without looking at it, but Chicken's Ball was started in 1940, I believe. Howard Demke was a teacher at Central School. He wanted to start a milk fund, so they put on a variety show, and it was about the life on the Barbary Coast, which was, 1890 to 1918 or something like that. There are 250 volunteers in the show. There are performers that range from 14 to 94. I believe at one point, and maybe Chet can correct me if I'm wrong, I think Audie Justice was beyond 94 when she was in a Chicken's Ball. But it's also supported by the PTA, and I believe the Educational Foundation also provides some support. I'm not sure, but I think maybe they do. But anyway, I think this is a great time to recognize them. They're a wonderful part of our community. Actually, my father was in the Chicken's Ball. My father-in-law, my late father-in-law was in the Chicken's Ball, as was my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, and my wife, of course. So anyway, what I'd like to do at this time, Mona, you have a few words you'd like to say?
Well, the Chicken's Ball is just this magical experience, and I often wonder why it survives for 80 years. We think it might be the longest-running PTA fundraiser in the universe. Okay, but bump. The thing is, when you look at it, other things pass. For a lot of reasons, and things have changed in San Carlos. A lot of our parents don't have the time that they used to have. But when I look at the Chicken's Ball, I think that one reason that it has survived, first of all, it is the people of San Carlos and the community that was built. When people get together and work on a big project that's really hard, and it's all volunteer, and they do something really big and really good and really fun, and they do it for someone else. They raise a good amount of money and then give it away to our schools, to the kids, the most important future, our future of San Carlos, our resource. And so I think that in itself has been the success of the ball. Besides the fact that it's just a whole lot of fun. And we do have a resurgence right now. We have quite a few new parents who've jumped in. And this is Karen Altoff, our production chair, and she's been working really hard on a great show. Donica Stanley is the head of steering, as is on the end, Julie Engberg. And right in the middle, our Gina is our publicity chair. She's been doing an amazing job. She got us lunch with Spencer Christian today. It's really fun. Thank you very much. Thank you for the proclamation.
Thank you, Mona. I think we should all give him a hand. I will present this to you and have you take it back to the rest of your colleagues. Thank you all for coming. I forgot to mention my aunt and uncle were in the show, too.
No, that's great.
Thank you again. Oh, I've just been asked if we could have a 5-minute recess, so we will be back at 8:40. I would request that my fellow council members come back to the dais. Okay, we are back. We are on item 10A. This is consideration of introducing an ordinance adding Chapter 8.10 minimum wage to the Title 8 of the City of San Carlos Municipal Code. Hello, Tara, again.
Evening. Tara Peterson, Assistant City Manager. This is coming to you this evening based on your request. We introduced this topic back in November of last year, and Council asked us to look into developing an ordinance, which we have done. I'm going to introduce Nicole Scott, our Senior Management Analyst in the City Manager's Department. That'll lead you through a few slides just as reminders of what we've done before and the new ordinance. So,
Good evening, Nicole Scott, Senior Management Analyst. So tonight we'll be asking City Council to introduce an ordinance adding minimum wage to the municipal code. So at the November 12th City Council meeting, we had a study session that was held to go over minimum wage in detail. We discussed current minimum wage laws, impacts on low-wage workers, impacts on businesses, and then the fiscal impacts for the city. So just as a review, minimum wage is established by federal, state, or local government. It sets the lowest wage an employer may legally pay its workers. The federal minimum wage for covered non-exempt employees has been $7.25 an hour since 2009. And then California's minimum wage will increase to $15 an hour in 2023. The table on this slide outlines the state schedule for increases and shows that the current wage in the state and then in San Carlos is $12 an hour for businesses with 25 or fewer employees, and then $13 for businesses with 26 or more employees. So council directed staff to conduct outreach to businesses through the Chamber of Commerce, review other local ordinances in the county, and then return with an ordinance for consideration. Additionally, council directed staff to include the provisions seen on this slide into the ordinance. So as a review there, the provisions were to increase minimum wage to $15 an hour effective July 1st of 2020. And then go on to enact annual increases starting January 1st of 2021. And that's going to be based on consumer price index with a cap at 3.5%. Also, no separate category for business size or tipped employees, and no sunset provision. And then if it makes sense, contract with the City of San Jose for enforcement services. And then upon ordinance adoption, implement a robust noticing and outreach plan to both businesses and employees. So as requested, staff reviewed other local ordinances in the county. We looked at Belmont, Daly City, Menlo Park, Redwood City, San Mateo, and South San Francisco. We used their language to craft our own ordinance, and we came up with the proposed ordinance before you that would increase minimum wage to $15 an hour starting July 1st of this year, and then on January 1st of next year, we would increase by CPI at the cap of 3.5%. So just some other details of the ordinance. There's a section addressing learners. For clarification, learners are defined as employees who are they're in their first 160 hours of employment, and that's in an occupation in which they have no previous experience. And they're able to be paid 85% of the minimum wage, and that comes from the state law. Another detail I'll go over is the violations process. So first we would receive a complaint, and then the city or its enforcement service provider would investigate using site visits, interviews, and document requests. Hopefully then the complaint can then be resolved informally, or if necessary, the city will take enforcement action per the municipal code. Enforcement measures could include administrative citation, compliance order. The business could have their business license revoked, or they could be required to post a notice of the violation. The violations process, it will be provided in the outreach materials that are going to be going out to the businesses and employees. So this slide shows the wage increase timing for the other jurisdictions. You can see that there are varying rates and timing throughout the whole county. Some similarities that we did see were that none had a separate category for business size or tipped employees. No one had a sunset provision, and across the board, the enforcement practices were all pretty similar. The only jurisdiction that differentiates between business size is the state. So the Chamber of Commerce conducted a survey of its 700 members from December to mid-January. It included a draft of the proposed ordinance, and we requested feedback. A summary of the comments was included in the packet tonight. We only got 20 members that commented, and we had mixed both for and against comments in their feedback. So there are some pretty minimal fiscal impacts involved in the implementation of a local minimum wage ordinance. Council approved the part-time employee salary and benefit resolution at the last city council meeting on January 27th. And so impacts to staff wages were addressed then. The next being noticing. So after ordinance adoption, the city will implement an outreach plan that includes noticing to, like I said, both the businesses and the employees. And those costs are able to be absorbed into our existing operating funds. Third, there is enforcement. So San Jose offers enforcement services to some other jurisdictions in the Bay Area. Redwood City and San Mateo both use them. So upon adoption, the city will contract with San Jose for enforcement services and will request funding during the upcoming fiscal year budget cycle. Okay, so tonight's recommendation is to introduce an ordinance adding Chapter 8.10 minimum wage to Title 8 of the San Carlos Municipal Code. So we're hoping to introduce the item this evening and then adopt at the next city council meeting so we can have sufficient time to do outreach and work with the businesses to get them ready for the July 1st raise to $15 an hour. With that, invite questions.
Okay, normally we would start asking questions, but continuing, I think, a great tradition started by Mark, we're going to have public comment. First, I do have one speaker card. Aaron Chaser.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members. On behalf of the San Mateo County Central Labor Council, our 110 affiliates, and 75,000 union members, we strongly support the staff report as presented to establish a minimum wage ordinance to raise the hourly wage of all businesses in San Carlos to $15 an hour by July 1st, 2020, with annual CPI increases beginning January 2021, strong enforcement language, and a robust public information campaign. San Carlos has a highly skilled and largely affluent workforce. With a median household income in excess of $150,000 a year and a low unemployment rate, most people in San Carlos are working and succeeding, but not everyone is earning enough. Self-sufficiency for a family of 4 in San Mateo County is $126,000 a year. To reach this, it would take 4 $15 an hour jobs. At least 16% of all San Carlos households earn under $50,000 a year and struggle with the high costs of housing, childcare, transportation, food, and healthcare. These everyday living costs are often overwhelming, especially for families. San Carlos is surrounded on all sides by cities that have already raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour or higher. In these cities, Most businesses, large and small, including retail, restaurants, and nonprofits, are already paying at least $15 to attract workers and remain competitive. In our experience, no businesses have gone out of business because of the minimum wage ordinance. Healthy businesses adapt. We recognize the challenges small businesses face, but we also recognize the impossible challenge for workers trying to survive on minimum wage in San Carlos. $15 isn't enough, but thank you for your leadership in starting there.
Thank you, Erin. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak on this? I see someone walking up. Suzanne, you're not coming in to talk on this item, okay? All right. Hang on a second. Okay. I think we have questions. Sarah.
Thank you, Mayor. I have one question for you, Nicole. I know that you studied ordinances in 6 other jurisdictions. Is there any major difference or things that were purposefully left out that we decided not to adopt in our ordinance?
So I was the one that put the ordinance together, so I'll answer that question. Not significantly, no. There was just little changes in the way it was organized. A couple of cities didn't talk about learners at all. But for the most part, it was very, very similar. I ended up using mostly Belmont and Redwood City because they were the closest cities to us, but otherwise it was very similar.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Mark.
Thank you, Ron. Actually, my question sort of is related to that, but it may be a Greg question. I'll leave it up to you guys to decide. The learners dimension here, that was, I don't recall us discussing that when we first brought this issue up. Is that an area where the state has preempted stuff? I mean, obviously they haven't totally preempted it, or we wouldn't be having this ordinance in front of us. But have they preempted that particular thing?
Well, that's a very good question. It comes out of state law, so I think when we were drafting it, we wanted to recognize that it's not clear to me tonight whether or not there's been a total preemption of that. I have a feeling that it probably is something that we, as a general law city, we might not be able to do. I mean, I could look into that for you before the next meeting, but I don't have a complete answer on that. But it comes out of state law, so.
Okay, following up on that, are there any other jurisdictions in San Mateo County that have already adopted rules here, like we're considering, that are general law cities that included the learners' language?
All of them included learners, but for 2, Menlo Park and what was the other one? And Daly City.
Are those, do you know offhand, Greg, if those are general law cities? Or?
Menlo Park is a general law city, and I think, and Daly City is too. Jeff knows the answer to that one.
So, right, I should have asked Jeff that question, or perhaps Shauna. So it's possible that we could make a choice as to whether or not we wanted to have the learner's language in here.
Yeah, it looks like other cities made that choice, but I just don't. I wish I knew the answer to your question precisely, whether or not there's been a total preemption of it. I think it's just sort of at this point a policy discussion for you whether we want to have that provision or not.
Last question, and I'll hand the baton off. If we were to adopt the language of the ordinances proposed by staff, could you do the research and come back, and if it was a choice, give us the choice to amend it at some future date, or are we locked in somehow?
Well, you can always amend an ordinance, but it may be procedurally that we might need to reintroduce it at the next meeting.
Well, I don't want to slow down the process because we do have the July 1st shot clock running against us. Maybe a better way of asking the question is, could you do the research and then come back and at some date in the future that doesn't interfere with July 1st, if we decide, if we can make the change based on your analysis, we could consider it?
Yes, you could.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think Adam was next.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess this question is for Greg. In terms of the timing, so if we introduce the ordinance today, next meeting, we would vote on the ordinance the first time.
This would be the first reading, and then the next.
Second reading, and then typically there's 45 days.
It's 30 days.
30 days. So what, I know we got sort of delayed on timing for stuff, so I'm just questioning about whether.
It would be, by my calculation, it would be April 8th. That'd be 30 days from March 9th, if it was on the March 9th meeting.
We would, if council was to adopt it at the next meeting, we would start the outreach immediately.
Okay. And so I guess the question I would have, because I'm just wondering we got behind on timing a little bit on stuff, whether the council, whether Tara and Jeff, you feel like the timing still works, or would one more month mean that we could get things, like if we went for an August 1 start date, would that give more time to get kind of everything out and in place and sort of organized, so people feel like the businesses feel ready to sort of deal with the change? Only because we were supposed to do this a month ago, and I'm just.
Well, it would really depend on the business, but we think we're ready to go. We know what we need to do, and we've got a lot of the documents ready to go, so we can get them right out. And it would be, if we started right now, so the next meeting would be March 9th, so conceivably be March 10th, we start reaching out for a July 1st start. So we think that's adequate.
Okay.
3 months.
Thank you.
Okay, Laura?
Thank you. So I want to talk a question about the enforcement aspect. So it was mentioned that most likely the complaint would be raised by an employee or staff member. Is that the only way that would get a response and action, or if others brought forward a concern? Tell me a little bit more, I guess, about the enforcement process and how that would work, and what the action would be around enforcement.
Well, we spoke with San Jose, who's been doing enforcement for other cities as well as their own city. They said most often it's been employees who have reported. But certainly if there was a report from anybody, we'd look into it. We'd ask them to look into it for us if we actually get into contract with them.
I might add that in the, besides the San Mateo, that's the San Jose enforcement, that any person who's aggrieved by a violation of the chapter, it's stated in our code, can file a civil action to collect any lost or any underpaid wages.
So would they have to file that, or would the city respond to a concern expressed by a member of the community?
Well, it would be a violation of the city's code, so that it could become a city enforcement action through my office, in addition to what San Jose is doing. And then on top of that, the employee could file an independent civil action, and they have remedies under state law, under the labor code, that include such things as, I believe, attorney's fees and costs of collection.
Okay, so it sounds like there's several avenues by which enforcement action could take place. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have one question, and I've heard this from, a few business owners regarding tipped employees. And there was a comment here I did notice that you said something about a waiter getting minimum wage, and they already make, more than anybody but the cooks in the restaurant. And I'm just wondering, maybe it's not a fair question to ask, but what is a response to a restaurant owner who's now got to pay a waiter who's making the equivalent of $40, $50 an hour a minimum wage? I'm struggling with that.
Well, while it seems like it could be unfair, you can't rely on tips to be your living wage. It's great that you get them, but they need to pay what the minimum wage is, no matter whether it be the state or this increased one here at the city.
Okay. Yeah, and I suppose there are days when there's not much business, and so their tips are going to be well below what they might normally be.
Possibly.
Okay. Okay, any other questions before we?
Through the
Yes,
chair.
sir.
Actually, just as a comment, I was thinking about your question, Ron, and this is obviously just my own personal opinion, but I've always tried to view tips as, because I don't always leave, the biggest tip in the world. I always try to look at tips as a recognition of decent service. And in that sense, it's therefore I view it as kind of above and beyond their compensation. That's why I think of it as a tip. I don't view myself as sort of paying part of their wages.
Right.
Now, and I understand opinions can differ on that, but that would be a response that I would give to a restaurant owner as well.
Good to know. Okay, if there's no other comments, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move to introduce ordinance number
1559.
1559, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Carlos adding Chapter 8.10, minimum wage, to Title 8 of the City of San Carlos Municipal Code.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Laura?
Thank you, Mayor Collins. So just to acknowledge some input I received from some of the local business owners, there was expressed concern about us raising the minimum wage. And this individual happens to be in the restaurant business. And I recognize that there's a lot of challenges in our community right now with respect to sustainability, both for people who are just trying to make a living, but also those people who are trying to run a small business. And I believe that there's a lot of factors at play that are really changing the dynamic, if you will, of small businesses in our community, both walk-in retail as well as sit-down restaurants. We happen to live in Silicon Valley, which is heavily tech-focused. As I'd mentioned earlier this evening, there's a huge war for talent, and many of the headquartered companies here are trying to entice staff by offering free meals, other services, sometimes products at cost, just to sway them to go to work for them. And it's changing really the complexion of the buyer profile in our community. In addition, I think we all know about online purchasing. This past winter, in the holidays, it was on record, probably the highest volume of products that went through that particular channel. So I'd like to just focus, though, tonight on this minimum wage in advocating for the worker, who is, as was described earlier, really just having a hard time making ends meet and making a living here. And I'd also invite us to, as a council, to really think about this enforcement aspect to ensure that retailers and restaurateurs have an opportunity for a level playing field. And maybe moving forward, we could identify metrics that we look at over time, for example, tax revenue from these businesses, to see if there's been any sea change since the economy rose, and we know that there's a more vibrant downtown now compared to before, to just kind of keep an eye on things, if you will, and if we get these complaints, follow up on them accordingly. And the other thing I would suggest is that we look at economic development efforts to really fortify the small business owner and restaurateur in our community, because they are the fabric of our community. So if there's things that we can consider as we move forward, while times are great, as we heard from the gentleman who gave us the survey results, we know that economic downturn can come. So I think the task at hand is to minimize the lows and maximize the highs, but make sure that the rising tide lifts all boats. So.
Okay, Adam?
Thank you, Mayor. Just want to say also I did hear from a couple restaurant owners separate from the chamber survey, and while I appreciate their concerns, I do think it's important to move forward to raise the minimum wage for all workers. And I do appreciate the enforcement. I'm glad that we're putting the enforcement piece in. I look at this just as, I want to echo some of Laura's comments, and also I look at this as we're working on affordable housing, we're working on childcare, and this is a third leg of things that we can be working on to help people here in San Carlos to get by and hopefully thrive moving forward. So thank you.
All right, and finally, Sarah.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just chime in that the issue that I keep coming back to is the fact that wages in our county have not kept pace with the skyrocketing cost of living, and we've heard that a lot. And this is not just wait staff in restaurants who are making minimum wage, but also our daycare workers, our nursing assistants helping the disabled and the elderly, janitorial jobs, and delivery drivers, just to name a few. I think it's really important that we in San Carlos level the playing field with our neighbors on the peninsula who have already passed a minimum wage ordinance, including our neighbors right next door like Belmont and Redwood City. So I'm glad that we're moving forward with this. I too recognize that this will have an impact on our small business owners, and I know personally that it's very hard to be a small business owner, but I think it's important to make sure that we do right by the people who are working in our community, and that we strive to make San Carlos a place where people of all income levels have a chance to thrive. So for that reason, I will be supporting this tonight.
Okay, Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to say that I too certainly appreciate the trials and tribulations that a lot of the local businesses are operating under in this rapidly changing economic environment. But I'd also like to remind the community that any even cursory look at the history of labor protections of all kinds in the United States has shown that left to its own devices, markets do exactly what markets are intended to do, which is to drive everything to the lowest possible cost, ignoring completely any kind of humanity issues or anything at all like that. That's in fact the basis in history of why various types of labor protections were enacted. Can you go too far in those directions? Absolutely, you can go too far in any direction. But I think this is an example of something I talk about an awful lot with people, which is a matter of striking and maintaining a decent balance in a community that's expressive of its values and its frankly, its humanity. And that's why I too will be supporting this measure.
All right, thank you. I want to thank Tara and Nicole for all your hard work on this. I know it's been, just another thing to do, but we do appreciate it. I would note for the record that San Mateo County considers a person who makes $33,850 a year to be extremely low income. That works out to an hourly rate of $16.93 an hour. So minimum wage is basically extremely low income. Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. Crystal?
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Palmer-Lohan?
Yes.
Councilmember Rack?
Yes.
Councilmember McDowell?
Yes.
And Mayor Collins?
Yes. Okay, moving on to item 10B, consideration of adopting a resolution adopting the City of San Carlos 2020 strategic plan. Now, are you going to give this presentation, Tara, or are you going to have somebody else give this presentation?
Had somebody to give it to. Would you like to do it? Okay. So good evening, Council. Tara Peterson, Assistant City Manager. Before you this evening, we have the 2020 strategic plan. So the role of the strategic plan is to identify current issues, needs, and interests that are both of strategic importance to the quality of life of the community. It requires focus of elected officials and professional staff on issues that have an urgent impact on the community and that are complex. The strategic plan is not a summary of city services, and it establishes goals to find ways to address the strategic issues now and into the future. I can tell I'm going to have trouble saying strategic. The development annual process that involves the City Council and the professional staff of the city in facilitated collaborative working sessions. The plan includes development of the city's mission, vision, core values, strategic goals, and objectives for the next year or so, and detailed work plans that will accomplish these goals. Development of the plan requires the knowledge and understanding that each participant in the process has about what is of strategic importance to the community. Council members represent the needs and interests of the residents, and the management staff are trained in local government management services. Together, they develop a strategic plan that best serves the needs of the entire community. So the process began this year with a mini retreat in December, followed by a council management team retreat in January. 2 weeks later, we had the management team retreat where we developed the draft objectives and work plans, and they are being presented to council for approval this evening. The mission, we slightly adjusted the mission this year. It reads, the City of San Carlos provides high quality service services, and facilities to its residents in a sustainable, transparent, responsive, and friendly manner to foster a safe and healthy community now and in the future. The vision statement is the same as last year. The City of San Carlos will continue to move with confidence into the future as a desirable, vibrant, inclusive, and business-friendly community admired by all as a great place to live, learn, work, and play. The core values, which are not in any particular order here, consist of fostering a safe, diverse, welcoming, and engaged community, ensuring fiscal responsibility and the sustainability of San Carlos's resources, infrastructure, and social cultural environment, protecting our physical environment from the threats of climate change, recognizing and respecting the needs and challenges of the community, demonstrating high ethical and professional standards, including high quality customer service, exhibiting the character and qualities of San Carlos by thinking strategically, remaining proactive, and planning for the future. And finally, supporting the well-being of employees, investing in their development, and aligning staffing and resources with the demand for city services. With that, Council established 6 strategic goals. These are in priority order. The first is East Side Planning Initiative. The City of San Carlos will be proactive in planning for future changes in land use, transportation, and economic development, including proposed market-driven development projects and the assessment of potential impacts and opportunities. Housing, this is a goal that we had last year as well. The City of San Carlos will actively encourage and support the creation of housing to provide a safe, diverse, and affordable supply by facilitating development of housing for all income levels. The third goal is from last year, but slightly modified: mobility, traffic, and transportation infrastructure. The City of San Carlos will actively pursue plans and strategies for improving mobility, traffic, parking, infrastructure for transportation, and street maintenance, while encouraging alternative modes of transportation to provide efficient, safe, and effective movement throughout the city. The fourth goal is childcare and youth programming. The City of San Carlos will encourage and support the creation of childcare facilities and promote access to youth programming. The fifth goal is wildfire, public safety, and emergency planning. The City of San Carlos will continue to prepare for public safety emergencies such as wildfire, earthquake, flood, power outage, school safety, and other potential community emergencies by developing and implementing risk mitigation and reduction strategies. And finally, climate change. The City of San Carlos will support sustainability initiatives and address climate change. With those goals in mind, staff developed objectives and work plans for each of them. The East Side Planning Initiative has one objective, which is to prepare a plan to address changes in development patterns and the influx of jobs, followed by the number of tasks I won't list those each time, but there's one task to be done under that objective. Under housing objective, we have 4 objectives. Increase the number of below market rate housing units to meet local and regional housing requirements, e.g. regional collaboration, grant programs, acquisition, and new development. Objective 2 is to study land use and other regulatory options to increase all types of housing. Objective 3 is to engage the community in dialogue about housing needs, challenges, and opportunities. Objective 4 is to facilitate completion of projects currently underway. Under mobility, traffic, and transportation infrastructure, we have 5 objectives. The first is identify and implement alternative modes of transportation, which are non-vehicular modes, to improve traffic flow and parking. Objective 2 is to identify and implement citywide street and intersection improvements to projects and initiatives to improve traffic flow and parking. Objective 3 is to develop community education, reporting, and outreach and information tools. Objective 4, identify and implement enhanced traffic and pedestrian safety opportunities. Objective 5 is to facilitate completion of projects currently underway. Childcare and youth programming. We have two objectives. The first is to increase access to childcare facilities, and the second is to address the community's needs for youth programming. Under wildfire, public safety and emergency planning, we have three objectives: to reduce the risk and threat of wildfire and prepare the community for such an event, to update emergency plans and policies, and finally, objective 3, to prepare for PG&E's Public Safety Power Shutoff, known as their PSPS program, implementation. And finally, we have climate change, one objective, which is to prepare the climate mitigation and adaptation plan. I can tell you that we've already begun work. We have our first 2 community meetings already scheduled, and we look forward to a very engaged process throughout the next year. Questions?
All right, before we go to questions, I do have a couple of speaker cards. David Britton, still here. Hello, David.
Good evening. I'll keep it quick. I just wanted to say thank you for including climate change as one of the strategic priorities for this year. As I think I've spoken to all of you, the urgency around taking climate action on climate change is clearly there, and the decisions the city are making, particularly around development, are going to have a very long-term impact over the next 30, 40 years with the housing stock that gets built. It's great to see that community engagement is part of what you're looking at here. I'd just ask that the community engagement is meaningful and is not just a rubber stamp on decisions that have already been made, and that the community is kind of involved and kind of actively listened to, and that is part of what goes into the planning process. Thank you.
All right, thank you, David. Next up is Ellen Dooley.
Thank you, Mayor Collins and City Council members and staff. I'm a 23-year resident of San Carlos and lately have become very active on climate issues. I was very glad to see and want to address the climate change task in the planning document that I read online called Identify Mitigation Measures. And when I look at this, I think I'm in a house that I bought that was built in 1961. It's going to be 60 years old next year, and in still very good shape. A house built today with gas is going to be 60 years old in 2080. It's going to be contributing to a warming climate all those years when it shouldn't be and doesn't have to be. So it's clear to me, and I'd like you to take this into consideration when you're doing your planning on mitigation, that if we're really going to address this issue in an honest way, that we stop allowing gas hookups in new construction. 17% of California's emissions are coming from gas that's used in buildings. So eliminating gas is the smart thing to do. There are now remarkable alternatives like induction stoves and heat pumps that are more energy efficient and also cost less to operate. I personally know this is a controversial issue because we love our gas ranges and fireplaces. I remodeled my kitchen 6 years ago and put in a gas range, not knowing the impact that it had on the climate. If I'd known then what I know now, I would have made a different choice. So I completely understand the challenge this presents, but I also feel it is our city's obligation to educate and to make decisions, no matter how unpopular, when it's in the best interest of the public. I also realize it can be easier to wait and adopt codes when the state mandates it, but I think San Carlos identify as a more forward-thinking community that is capable of rising above baseline codes and helping to lead the way. So as you develop this year's Climate Mitigation and Action Plan, I request that you lead on this issue and incorporate eliminating gas in building codes, at the very least, in all new construction. So thank you for considering this. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate your service.
Thank you, Ellen. Okay, Suzanne Emerson.
Good Good evening, Suzanne Emerson of San Carlos Green. I'm glad to see the timeline for revising the Climate Action Plan is part of the strategic plan. There have been many developments on climate issues since 2008 when we first drafted the elements that are in the city's current Climate Action Plan. I wanted to update the council on a couple of issues related to electrification reach codes. When the council discussed this issue in November, there were many municipalities that were still just talking about what they were going to do, what they weren't going to do, how to do it. Since then, the County of San Mateo has adopted all electric for new construction. So now there are in San Mateo and Santa Clara counties 7 municipalities with all electric reach codes for new residential construction, and 6 more that require new residential be electric for heating and water heating. When the reach codes were discussed in November, there was a suggestion made that maybe the state would be making changes in what it's going to do sometime before the next 3-year code cycle comes around. I checked with the California Energy Commission and heard back from them just today that they said that they are discussing incorporating reach code electrification options in the 2022 energy code. That's the code that would go into effect in 2023, but that they do not anticipate any major modifications to the energy code mid-cycle, anytime before 3 years from now. So I hope, as part of its commitment to addressing the climate crisis, the city can proceed with electrification reach codes adoptions in the near future and not wait 3 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suzanne. Okay, I see we have questions. Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sort of a question and a comment. This has to do with slide 9, East Side Planning Initiative, objective and number of work plan items. And by the way, I thought the overall staff did a good job of synthesizing a whole bunch of input from a whole bunch of different meetings, which is always a massively challenging problem. So thank you for doing that. My question here is, when I read this, I don't actually have a problem with the way the objective is worded, but given the massive nature and how big this topic is, I guess at the very least, it doesn't seem like there's I'm going to say, for lack of a better term, a sufficient degree of urgency. And as I was jotting things down, and I'm not trying to wordsmith stuff here in real time, but I kept thinking along the lines of not just prepare a plan to address changes, but prepare a plan to manage the changes, because the changes are coming, and it's highly unlikely that they're not going to come. And so, I don't know, address changes rather than manage them or be more proactive. That's the element I'm trying to get in here. So I appreciate getting some feedback about, was that considered when staff was reducing this to words, and why did you end up with these words as opposed to something that might be more akin to what I was just talking about? Good evening, Al.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. I think the intent when we were writing it was an immediacy. The plan would be prepared right away. So if the wording doesn't reflect that, then I think that wording that better reflects that sense of urgency on the page is fine. But that's the intent, is to start the project right away.
And by the way, I would given limited resources, I'd much rather spend time actually working the issue than working the words, okay? Sure. So you've helped me a lot just by answering that. So we do expect to get started on this quickly, and the focus is actually to try and, my fear is that we come up with something that may be a beautiful plan, and it gets to go live 2.5 years from now, and we're like, well, 3 of the major developments have already been approved. So next time we have a major change, it'll be useful. You see what I'm getting at?
Yes.
So, but it sounds like you're trying to race that clock too.
Well,
to the extent you can.
Yeah, and I mean, to some extent, there are limitations with regard to our approach to the development projects that are before us. And one of the things that we can do is take those development projects and use them as case studies for the plan and work in concert with the developers, the applicants, as we prepare the plan at the same time. And I think that would be a good approach, but we can't stop the projects themselves unless there was another mechanism to do that at this point. So we can, again, the developers all know that the council and the city wants to do this. So we've talked to them extensively, that we've talked about timing and things like that. But we don't have a mechanism to stop those projects. So we do need to process those in tandem and in concert with the preparation of this plan.
Okay. I'm not sure I completely agree with that based on my own research and discussions with Greg and other people. But to be clear, having just made that last statement, I'm not interested in stopping things either. That's why I chose the word, I want us to manage what's going to happen rather than say, hey, we learned a lot. Next time this happens, we'll do a better job, because the next time will be 20 years down the road. As long as staff continues to maintain a sense of urgency about this, given how significant it was, I think, in the council discussions, then we can move forward. I mean, I'm fine with the words as they are, because the words are less important than what's going to happen. Okay, thank you.
Add that we do recognize that this is a council priority, and this is why it's number one in our goals.
And I was just going to add, if the council feels that the word manage better expresses their desire in this particular objective, we'd be happy to change that. This is actually very similar to what's been going on in my office for the last few weeks, where we've spent a few days on one particular objective where we just didn't feel comfortable with one single word, and we'd all be just throwing out words at each other all week, until finally somebody would say, that's it, that's the perfect word. I don't remember this one coming up, so if this better reflects your vision, then we should change it.
I'm not going to speak for anybody else on the dais. I don't, as long as the intent is there. I mean, look at, guys, actions speak louder than words, okay? I don't care what words we put on the paper. What I care about is what we do, and what we enable ourselves and our successors to do. That's really the critical thing here. And it's just that we happen to be operating under, as we all know, somewhat of a shot clock. So as long as everybody's aware of that and we're honoring that to the best we can, fine. Don't care what the words are.
All right, and I apologize. I forgot to ask if there was anyone else after the last speaker who wanted to come up and make a comment. And I have got no more cards, but I did want to at least express that openness. Okay, I don't see anybody else's light on. I think, unless I hear anything else, I think we're ready for a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt Resolution 2020-6. Six? We've only done 6 so far?
6.
A resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos adopting the City of San Carlos 2020 Strategic Plan.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Final comments?
I have a comment.
Okay.
I can jump in. I just wanted to thank staff I can tell that a lot of work went into the strategic plan, and I know that we had a very far-reaching conversation over 2 different days, our mini retreat and then our actual retreat. So I think that this is a great document. I really like having the goals and the action items laid out, and I appreciate all the time that went into that. I think, echoing Mark's comments, I'm excited to kick off the East Side Planning Initiative so we can be proactive with development. I think that's really important, that we make sure that the projects that come to San Carlos meet the needs of our community. And I'm also excited and proud that childcare and youth programming are included this year as a goal. This is an opportunity to meet a real need in our community, and I think it being called out as an actual city goal speaks to our motivation as a council to see some real progress made on these issues. So thank you.
Laura?
I just want to thank staff for this as well. And also, it's just heartening. Tonight, earlier, we took a presentation on feedback from the community about what was on their mind. And I can confidently say that I think a lot of the actions that are planned that we'll be working on are a direct reflection of what's happening and what's on the minds of our residents. So I'm really pleased that I feel like there's a lot of synergy there, and I'm glad for that. And I also want to thank the council and staff for the climate change goal. That is an area where the more I talk to people, the more people are really concerned about it. We have lots of issues that are of great urgency that we need to face. But again, the longer I hang around planet Earth, the more I realize how interconnected we all are. So building a strong community, serving everybody in it, regardless of their age, so children all the way up to our seniors, as well as the planet that we rely upon, I think is really important work. So thank you.
All right. Jeff, I see your light on.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the council for all the time and energy that you all put into your preparation for the strategic planning process. It goes on for a couple of months, and we were all very impressed with the thoughtfulness and preparation that went into it. It was well organized. I think you're seeing the results being a more robust document this year. And just also like to pass on my thanks as well as the staff's thanks for the council's willingness to continue to be inclusive with the staff who participate in the process. It's a great learning opportunity for folks to be able to see how policy gets set and made in a city and to see it done in such a transparent and professional, inclusive way. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. My final comment is sort of it's broken record time. I'm sounding like everybody else, but that's okay. I want to, again, thank staff. This is a huge, heavy lift. These strategic plans have slowly had an impact on me over the years. I realize every year how more and more how important they are. This one is very robust. It's different, and that's a breath of fresh air. And my thanks to I think what we have is a very collaborative council that's really starting to come into their own. So I think we're ready for a vote.
Vice Mayor Parma-Lohan?
Yes.
Councilmember Rack?
Yes.
Councilmember McDowell?
Yes.
Councilmember Olbert?
Yes.
And Mayor Collins?
Yes. Okay, moving on to item 11, and the order seems to be a little backwards. It was pointed out to me. So we'll go to 11B first, reflections and agenda setting. Adam?
I just want to mention I was out doing some, I was in New Hampshire a couple weeks ago and got a chance to see all the presidential candidates, and it was a really awesome experience to go with my daughter to sort of see democracy firsthand. And I know we won't have another meeting before the election, so I just want to encourage people to take advantage of democracy here and get out and vote and do your research and get out and support your right candidate.
All right. Well, I'll be coming to you for voting advice then. So. I don't see
Have lots of thoughts.
I don't see any other lights on. Any staff comments on city administrative business?
Nothing this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. All right. Well done, everybody. Meeting is adjourned. Get it out here. Get it done by 9:30.